Someone make it make sense.
Probably a couple.
Hello, hello. We are back for part 3 of the Orange County Sheriff's Office investigative report. So at the end of part 2, you might have heard me, if you listened, say, I'll be right back in just a second for part 3. So I did. I came back for part 3, and somehow my audio got booted from StreamYard, though I didn't know this. So I recorded part 3, and then after the fact, I realized that there was no sound for the entire thing, so I deleted it. So it's all good. We will pick up where we left off from part 2. But first, what we're going to do is take a look at some of the things we have going on here. So I have made some improvements in the interim to this how we're going to be doing this PDF here. So let me get the editor on here. So we have so with the highlighting, right? So it's going to be color coded. So this light yellow is general info. The orange is extra important information. So this would be information that's just general information, but not from a specific individual or about a specific individual. It could be just like about more than one person. And you guys will see as we go through. The red is George, purple is Cindy, blue is Casey, and green is Lee. Okay, so that's the first thing. And then where we first start with some important stuff here is on page 12. So we're just going to kind of recap and go through, and I'm going to also update my George sheet. So what I have so far going on here with these documents is like I was working on this one. So this is all the facts that are in here, or evidence or statements that are upon which the state has been building their case, and this is the compilation, the result of the fruits of their labor in this investigation, right? So so then I'm going to be doing another one for George. So let me just real quick see something here. Okay, let me just make sure I have the. So this. Okay, so let me go over here. Make this the right size. And get rid of it's still, hang on. Okay, let's just make sure it's the right size. Oh dear. Okay, hang on. Let's fix this. Just make sure. Word. Microsoft Word. Okay, perfect. Actually, and I want it to have, there we go. There we go. Perfect. All right. So going through this document here. All right. So the first thing that I have highlighted in this entire document is actually about George. And so this is from July 15th. This is the same day that they showed up and they realized she was missing and they took her to the different apartments. And so this is after Detective Melich. So prior to leaving, I was approached by her father, George, who stressed his concern that his daughter is holding back information. So George approaches him to say that, throws her under the bus right away. And his wife, Cindy, feared something may have happened to Caylee. So that's going to be the first thing I'm going to put here. Because, we see this in people all the time. If they're guilty, right, they might go ahead and say, hey, look at this person, right? So on July 15th, George approaches Detective Melich and tells him he believes, let me try to get it verbatim here. Okay, Caylee may be holding back information. Believes Caylee may be holding back information. Both he and Cindy state or both he and Cindy fear something. And I pointed out, this was in part 1, that this was a really odd statement to me. Something may have happened to Caylee. And the reason I'm saying it's odd is because they've already just realized that she's been missing for a month. And that was the reason for the 911 call. So it's odd that then after all of this, and they've been talking to people and they've been doing all this stuff, trying to figure things out, and then to say something may have happened to her. Well, of course something happened to her. Like, according to Caylee, what happened to her is she was taken by the nanny. Anyway, it's just weird. So both he and Cindy fear something we found. Okay, so then it's like obviously something's happened because that's why you call 911. Okay, so then this blue, right? So this is Caylee. So this I thought was interesting that, again, this is on the document for the things that they feel are important in terms of their case against Caylee, right? So when she was confronted with a lie, basically, about Tom Manley, she gave no explanation. And then the other thing that was interesting was she walked with purpose, because we heard that same statement about Richard Allen from one of the eyewitnesses. She failed to mention anything about Ricardo. All the stuff we kind of went over in the other live streams. She didn't show obvious emotion, so lock her up. And this is going to come up again about Zenaida Gonzalez. And I think this was in part 1. We talked about this, but there is a real Zenaida Gonzalez, and she did go to the Sawgrass Apartments, which is just wild. Okay, next. So George Anthony completed a statement affidavit allowing us to search and provide and why do I feel like I typed this up? Oh, right. So that I typed up here because of the fact that that's evidence against Caylee, but I put it in red because it's a George statement, which also could be George trying to direct attention elsewhere, right? So where is that? Where is it? Here it is. Here. Okay. So what I will do, just copy and paste that into George's. Okay. And then this is part of all the trash inconsistencies, because here, this is interesting. So here it says, while on the phone with George for the above request, I asked if he would be able to show us where he had thrown the trash out. Keep that in mind. This says he had thrown the trash out. George says he'd be willing to show where this was. That's going to come back. All of these we mentioned previously. When the door opened, a very foul odor. So that's important, because this is what we've heard from all the testimony, that when the door opened, some people didn't smell the smell, but the people that smelled it when the door was open. That's going to come up again as well. Simon stated that's rotten. George did not reply. So So let me add this in here. This is still on July 15th. So I wonder, well, let me see if I can do this. Can I minimize this? Let me try something here. Let me try something. So if I do this, and then I make this smaller, I'm just trying to see if I can have both of these on the screen at the same time. Okay, so Simon Birch notices the smell from the car when the door is opened. He stated to George, "That's rotten." And George, so this is important. He didn't say anything. All this is going to come up. Did not reply. He also says that George opened the trunk. And I feel like in the testimony, George tried to say that he didn't know who did, and maybe it was Simon, that type of thing. I'm pretty sure actually he said Simon did. And then here's the contradiction I was mentioning about the garbage. Simon threw the garbage bag over the fence, right? That contradicts what we just saw a second ago, where it looks like they thought George threw the garbage. So this is Simon threw the garbage over the fence. All right, now this is a big one. This is the secret meeting. So on July 24th, George asks for a secret meeting with detectives so he can work his little plan. Right here, he mentions the car. Where this is leading, I don't want to think about it. But I had the bad vibes the very first day when I got that car. I mean, when I got that car, I mean, how, like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, just because there's a car that was towed doesn't mean anybody died or is anybody missing, you know? But this would be something, you know, this sounds like one of those consciousness of guilt things, right? In a way. So he states that he had bad vibes the very first day when he got that car. And then here again, I hope it stays in the confines of us three, trying to keep things secret. He also states that he hopes the information provided during this secret meeting stays in the confines of us three. And I think they mentioned earlier too that this was surreptitiously recorded, so he doesn't realize that well, it's not staying in the confines, that's for sure. Okay. So this is when Yuri Melich brings up the smell again. When I first saw you that night, when I first came to your house, there was a mention of the car, and there was a mention of what you smelled in the car. And then this is really interesting. So George says, I believe there's something dead back there, and I hate to say the word human. I hate to say that word, and this is what's so crazy. As a matter of fact, and he's talking to Detective Melich, when you were in court the other day, you did not say that initially. You were led that by the prosecutor. I caught that. I'm not too naive. So she led that into human decomposition, exactly like she did in the trial. You did not say that. I know that is a fact. I've been around. So this is where, as I said on the first live stream, part 1, that it seems like what George is getting at is he's trying to kind of convince Detective Melich to feel like he should be saying human decomposition and not just decomposition, or that he's trying to figure out if Detective Melich would testify to that, because in his previous statements that were earlier, we went over it in part 1. Detective Melich just says decomposition. He says it several times. Same as on the stand, and same as what George is saying here, that he had to be led by the prosecutor or whatever. And George doesn't like that. That's what's interesting, right? Why does George not like that? So, also during the secret meeting, George, let's see, criticizes Detective, I guess you can say criticizes Detective Melich for saying the smell was decomposition and not human decomposition. Unless led by the prosecutor. This part is crucial, because this to me was huge. I freaked out when I read this the first time, because he says, as I walked around to the driver's side and I put the key in it, and he's referencing the door because we know that door was locked. I said, please don't let this be what I think it is. And the reason this is crucial is because, like I pointed out just a second ago, the testimony from everybody is that you didn't smell the smell until you opened the door. So in other words, he's already concerned, but he's early because he hasn't opened the door yet. So in other words, this contradicts his testimony, George's testimony and others, right, where they smell the smell and then they're concerned. He's saying this, please don't let this be what I think it is, although he's not specifying what he thinks it is, but it's implied, right, without having smelled the smell yet. That's why I was saying consciousness of guilt there. So George says, please don't let this be what I think it is before. For anyone who missed it, I've got a couple keys on my laptop that get stuck on a regular basis. It's usually B's and H's. Before the car door was opened. Ugh, that's damning. That's damning. Okay. And as you can see here, even Simon Birch says comments on the smell once the door is open. And that's consistent with what Simon's testimony was in the trial and earlier, like we pointed out. I'm sitting here as the grandfather, as the father, as George Anthony, as a guy who smelled the smell 4 years ago, and you just never forget it. I even stuck my nose down on it, and I'm concerned. Which is just another weird thing. Regarding the smell, he later says, I even stuck my nose down on it, and I'm concerned. There's a lot of weird stuff in here. So for this part, I'm actually gonna, let me make this big again. Okay, that's what she said. This is the weird stuff. There's this weird story about Gunpoint that never gets fully flushed out. Oh, did we tell you about a report supposedly that she was at Gunpoint? And then it switches immediately. Well, $4,000. Yeah, actually, what the fuck? And then Lee told me that when we were sitting there. That's why that's green. Just us four. And then George says, I mean, she puts on a pretty good act, I guess. I don't know if she's playing actress or what. But I said, and again, that's him throwing her under the bus. Where's the officer's card? I want to see it. I want to know what's going on, blah, blah. And I guess this is in reference to the Gunpoint, but it could be in reference to the money. I mean, this is all very weird because nobody finishes their sentences, apparently. And then this is the part about how apparently she made a deposit into Cindy's bank account, but it might have been a fake deposit. And again, that never gets fully fleshed out because when he asks him, well, did that actually deposit money or was it just a deposit slip? And then he doesn't answer the question and then changes topic to the cars. Okay, here's another one. And that's if she's still with us. Again, this is only 6 days. I did the math on the part one. This is only 6 days after they've reported her missing. And this is before any of the video jail calls. And during the video jail calls, George keeps saying, I know she's still alive. And he comments, I know she's happy. And I hope they're letting her watch her videos in reference to whoever's kidnapped her. And it's very bizarre testimony or, from him. But here he's already saying 6 days in, and that's if she's still with us. So only 6 days after, actually, July 15th. Wait, I might not have that math. Hold on. July 24th. Okay, it's actually 9 days, I think. July 24th. And so this was, she went missing on, well, no, she went missing on, or she was, July 15th. So 9 days. Okay, so 9 days. Only 9 days after Caylee was reported missing, George says to detectives, and that's if she's still with us. Then we have Laddergate. He mentions that, okay, so let me, George also mentions that Cindy found the gate open and the pool ladder up. Laddergate. And the purple is Cindy, right? So, and we already know about this statement because that's a big deal. Then this other weird part about the 911 calls. He didn't want Lee to know that he was with them. He asks the detectives to lie for him, and they do, which is just, can you even imagine? George asks them to not tell Lee, and so they make up this ruse. He goes outside, and then they go along with it. Crazy. George asks detectives to lie to Lee about, how did he word it? Right, okay, that he was with them. To lie to Lee about George having met with them. Again, this is from this because it's the secret meeting. And they comply. The whole thing's weird. And it looks like George didn't end up listening to the tapes. He was in the bathroom. And that's Lee throwing Casey under the bus. So we're looking for more red. Okay, this part. So this part here is just indicating how George would have been the second to last person to see Caylee alive. In other words, it actually says verbatim, this is the last time anyone interviewed aside from Casey can say they were in the presence of Caylee Anthony. So again, that should make him a potential suspect, right? Just common sense. George is the last person to see Caylee alive besides Casey. That's again, that just points to him as being potential suspect. So, okay. And then right, the chloroform searches, right? So this was the chloroform searches and we're going to hear about that on the next episode from the forensics dude, computer forensics dude. But the chloroform searches, these were made from the Anthony family computer, right? So then you have this, well, so anyone that lived there could potentially be using it. Now Lee wasn't living there. So you got George, Cindy, and Casey. So here it says he looked at their work schedules. Cindy's work records show she was working. George's work records show he was not actively employed. So that means he potentially could have been the one making those searches. That matters, right? If they think that these searches are bad enough to show that Casey committed murder because she could have been available to make those searches, then how is that same not true for George if he was available to make those same searches? George was available. Oops. During the month of March when the chloroform, and it wouldn't just be the chloroform searches, it would be any of the searches that were done. So when we get to all these Google searches, right, from the family computer, we'll just have to keep in mind, George, it could have been George, like we don't know. When the chloroform searches were made. Because he was in between jobs or whatever. So there is no reason to believe he couldn't have made those searches. Okay. All this, again, we covered previously. And this is where we left off, actually, on part 2. Okay, so this is this interesting part about New York Italiano. So there's another Tony, right? And then, and of course, there's also all the Anthonys, right? So, you know, we have Tony Lazarro, Anthony Lazarro, right? But this is Anthony Rusiano. This has not come up in the trial. And this is what's crazy. So Casey was chatting with him, and he was recently employed as a deputy sheriff at the Orange County Sheriff's Office, which is bizarre. But they have these chats, and this is exactly where we left off. So the first thing that was noteworthy is that on May 3rd, Casey references the nanny. Again, more than like a month and a half before the last time anybody saw Caylee. And this is to this dude, this Anthony dude. And so the rest of this we didn't go over. So we're going to go over it now because I did go over this part. But here's the next thing that was interesting. And so this went on the list of damning information for Casey. That, because this is not somebody's memory, this is an actual message that she typed, right? So so they're talking about getting together. Casey typed, "Ha, want me to bring the little snot head," followed by "didn't think so." And I think I'm all right. I mentioned this on the other live stream, but it was the one that I had to delete because there was no sound. So what I was saying about this then, and I'll say it again now, is that that's interesting because if you look at the timing here, you've got all these messages that are like back to back. And then you have a big gap between 143 and 208 when this message comes in. And then you have another big gap, an even bigger gap between 208 and 253 before the next comment. And so what you might think, what I'm thinking here is what happened in between, because if they're wanting this to look like this could be anything, right? It really could be anything. The context matters. But if maybe what they did, if they're presenting only the messages directly before preceding it and directly after it that have to do with the nanny and putting it into that context, then you would think she's talking about her daughter, right? But we don't know what happened before. We don't know what happened after. And it's interesting that there's so much time in between referencing the nanny. So this could be, I mean, who knows what it could be, right? But nonetheless, this, I've added it to the list for Caylee because, again, this is here, and this would be something that they found damning against her, and it would be contributing towards the state's theory that she got rid of Caylee because she didn't want to be a mom anymore or whatever. Again, there's minuscule evidence to support that, and there's tons of evidence to support the opposite. But okay, you go, state, you go. Okay, so this we heard from Jamie Relander. She testified early on in the trial, but Jamie said Caylee drank occasionally and she didn't know anything about Caylee using drugs. Okay, so now here's the next part that's interesting. So we have a new character, as it were. So Rick, entering into the world, we have Rick. I don't know how to say that. This is Caylee's uncle, so it's Cindy's brother, okay? So this is what's interesting. So he agreed to speak with them. Rick explained that Caylee had stolen a lot of money from her mother, Cindy, and even forged a grandparents' checks. Rick also indicated that Caylee and Cindy's relationship was strained, according to Rick. He says, so that's how I know that. Anyway, the counselor who had told Cindy just kicked them out on the street, and Cindy wouldn't do that. She goes, what about Caylee? She says, I can't kick my granddaughter out on the street. And because Caylee would try to take her. And finally, the counselor said, well, you need to file for custody. So according to Rick, Cindy's seeing some sort of counselor, and the counselor is telling Cindy to kick Caylee out and then file for custody, which that's not sound advice. That wouldn't work legally. She has no grounds for that, just because they're not getting along or whatever. And it's just like a jealousy thing or a possessive thing. And again, the thing that's interesting about the possessiveness, and we know Cindy had that possessiveness about Caylee. We know, we've seen that in her own testimony. The thing that's interesting about that is that really just flies in the face of the state's theory, the one I just mentioned, because it's like, well, if Caylee really did just want to go and be a partier and not be a mom, which again, there's like so little evidence to even support that. But even if that was the case, gladly Cindy would have taken her, right? And Caylee even says as much in the interrogation at Universal Studios. She even says that. She says, if I really wanted to just go and do whatever, I would have just left her with my mom. And in fact, it's like Cindy wanted that to happen, apparently, and was being advised by a counselor to take steps in that direction. So then Rick continues, so I know Cindy a couple times had threatened Caylee. This is through my mom, that if Caylee didn't behave and straighten up, she would throw her out on the street and file for custody. So I need to actually highlight this. I'm going to do this purple for Cindy. Crazy. And then Yuri Melich says, and she told you this? Did Cindy tell you this? Or is this coming from Shirley, your mom? So Shirley is the mom of Rick and Cindy. And he says, this is coming from my mom. And he says, you can look up where Caylee's been stealing. He says stuff about how she'd been using their credit cards. And so he asks their mom, so when did Caylee start stealing? And Cindy says, well, you don't know. Well, don't you know that Cindy had, this doesn't make any sense. This says, and Cindy says, well, don't you know that Cindy had almost bankrupted them? Oh, okay. And then he says, now Cindy or Caylee? Right. And then he says Caylee. So he got the names confused. Rick did, which is easy to do. I've done it a billion times. There's just too many C names. Caylee was running up the credit cards. Okay. And then this is another detective here, Scott Bolin. This is from the FBI. He says, right, on that note, how would you describe what you know about the relationship between Cindy and Caylee? We've heard varying stories. And he says, I would describe it as Caylee resented Cindy. And we heard rumblings of this when Cindy was on the stand. On direct, one of the times, she was talking about that MySpace post that she made or whatever, where she apparently was like really cruel and said some really horrible things to Casey. And when asked by the prosecutor, like why she thinks what was going on there, Cindy said that she thought Casey was jealous of her. And I was very confused. I was like, jealous of her? Jealous of her for what? And we never got any context for that. But we're getting it here. She resented Cindy to the point where she could see that Caylee likes Cindy way better than she likes her. Now, all of this is speculation, right? Into Casey's mindset, right? And from Cindy saying this. Like, this didn't come from Casey saying it. This came from Cindy saying it. So in other words, Cindy has an impression that Casey is jealous of her and then tells people that. So that's not evidence that Casey feels any sort of way, right? So I'm going to highlight this. I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it purple. I'll do it purple. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do it blue because it could be that they're thinking that this could be something that the resentment caused her to kill. Again, the thing is like all of this, all the things that the state has been trying to do, it's so many conflicting theories that they're offering for motive. Now, they don't have to prove motive, right? Well, they're not required to, but in this case, the jury would want it, right? And the problem is they're offering all these different options. None of them are supported by any evidence, and they all conflict with each other. So this is one of them. Maybe they're trying to think, because we heard the rumblings about it from Cindy herself saying about the jealousy. It's like, are they trying to offer that then Casey killed Caylee because she was just to punish Cindy? You know, all of these different things. Is it that, or is she wanting to be a party mom? Like, you know, so, but because this could be, they do end up trying to kind of use this, I'll go ahead and highlight that for Casey. So let me pull up. Okay, so Rick also tells detectives that based on what Cindy said, he believes Casey resented Cindy because Caylee liked Cindy better. And all this, of course, is according to Cindy. Way better. Okay. Rick also explained that the first time the family learned Casey had left the house was the day she got arrested. And so this is just about how he finds out. Then here's the part about the wedding. So actually, these are out of order. Let me fix this. Who says, let me do this. Based on what Cindy said, he believes because it's way better. Rick also tells detectives Rick also tells detectives Casey's beginning his way. Okay. So they speak to Casey's uncle Rick, who says, based on what Cindy said, he believes Casey resented Cindy because Caylee liked Cindy way better. Rick also tells detectives Casey's habitual lying began at his wedding when she denied being pregnant. Okay, so that's here. This is where we are. So, okay. Well, let me give you this, Rick says. When they showed up for my wedding, all right, here it was June 4th. And we heard about this. This is one of the first things we heard about in the entire trial was this wedding, about her being pregnant, right? He says, and I answered the door and Cindy and George came in. And then I looked because I thought only Cindy and George were coming to my wedding with my mom and dad. My older brothers were busy and I didn't want to bother them. So he looked up and Casey was at the door. And I looked up and I go, oh, Casey, I didn't know you were coming. And when I looked down, she had a tight-fitting top on and her stomach was protruding, all right? And her belly button was sticking out at least a half inch. And he says this is the day before his wedding. And he says, so I invited all of them in and we were all talking because I hadn't seen them for a long time. And when I got Cindy and George alone, I said, Cindy, I said, George, I said, what's up with Casey? I said, you got something to tell me? What's going on here? And they go, what? And I said, she's expecting? And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I looked over at my wife-to-be and she just rolled her eyes. And I said, Cindy, I said, she looks like she's pregnant. Come on. And Cindy goes, oh, no, she's not. She's putting on weight. I said, Cindy, I said, I've seen a lot of pregnant girls, but I'm not an expert. But man, I said, she looks pregnant. And everyone on my wife's side said, who's the pregnant girl? You know, every time they would see her, they saw pictures of her wedding. Who's the pregnant girl? And then Rick continues, well, so I said, Cindy, I asked my mom and dad because they were there. I go, Mom, I said, Casey's pregnant. And she goes, that's what dad and I thought. Cindy swears that she's not pregnant. And then Yuri goes, and Cindy's telling you this? And Rick says, yeah, Cindy's a nurse. And I'm going, Mom, she's a nurse for crying out loud. Can't she see it? And so I said, Cindy, I said, come on. And I said, you're kidding me? Now tell me, is Casey pregnant? And then here's what Cindy says. Casey told us that she'd have to have sex first in order to have a baby and that she did not have sex with anyone. So it's like an immaculate conception, apparently, is what Cindy believes happened, I guess, or doesn't believe happened because she just denying the pregnancy. So I'm thinking, okay, then if it's not a baby, then it's a tumor. And she's only got a short time to live because it's big. Here she was 7 months pregnant. And then Rick says, I would say this about Casey. If she sees something or she'll spin it into her own little world to make it work for her. And Cindy was on her back trying to find out who the father was. And then he suggests that he thinks that's when Casey cut out that obituary, which we've heard about already as well, to try to be like, this is the father. And so this is another thing that's interesting. So when I first saw the extent of what she would lie was at the wedding. So it sounds like the lies, in his experience, in Rick's experience, the lies really started when they were at the wedding and she was pregnant and denied being pregnant. So, and I make sure I have this on the sheet somewhere. Okay, yep, there it is. I have it there. Perfect. Okay. So then they went to go speak with Shirley, Rick and Cindy's mom. She confirmed some of the things that Rick had mentioned about, you know, I don't think it's the biggest deal, $354 and then $54. I mean, you know, so it's like $400. That's, you know, yeah, stealing is awful, but it's not like she stole. I mean, that's really petty compared to what other people steal, right? The counselor allegedly, so back to this counselor, the counselor allegedly told Cynthia to kick Casey out. Cynthia had mentioned to Shirley a couple of times that she intended to get custody of Caylee. Cindy would even have let Casey live with them, but she would have had guardianship of Caylee. Cindy told Shirley that she would sell her house and rent an apartment to get custody of Caylee. Now, I don't know why that would be necessary, but that's what Cindy said. Shirley says she's heard the name Zanny for over a year. Then she also recounts the whole thing about the wedding, and Cindy acted as if she didn't know Casey was pregnant. Let me highlight that purple. I mean, this shows right here, again, that even the mom, Shirley, is essentially here admitting, right, that her daughter, Cindy, also is doing the same stuff that everyone accuses Casey of, right? Lying about stuff, hiding stuff, whatever. But this is an admission that Cindy does the same thing, which, you know, I think is just incredibly obvious. But, you know, again, it's just so interesting that you've got the brother and the mom of Cindy who noticed Cindy doing the same thing, right? Like acting like she's not pregnant, lying, denying, all this. But then only Caylee is, criticized or considered to be damning when Caylee lies, but no one's making the same type of connections to Cindy doing the same exact things. Anyway, okay, so then Caylee was arrested at her residence on August 29th for the various economic crimes. So then on September 5th, Detective Melich receives a phone call from Richard Grund, which is Jesse Grund's father. Now, remember, Jesse Grund was considered to maybe be the father of Caylee, but then I think there was a paternity test and it was determined he was not the father. And from what we know, Jesse and Caylee had a really bad breakup. So Richard agreed to meet with them. So on the second Sunday that the family held a vigil for Caylee, Richard called George over the phone and left a message offering help and asking him the question, why aren't you doing what ex-cops do? So in other words, Jesse Grund's dad thought George was acting in a way that seemed weird because George wasn't doing what ex-cops do. And I would expect that to mean like participating in the investigation, right? Or trying to help. George called him back. And so Richard says, George immediately called me and he said he wanted to talk to me. He wasn't avoiding me, but he was, quote, here's my answer to your question as to why I'm not doing what you think I should be doing. And he said, because my wife doesn't want me to. It's all very bizarre. I mean, again, this makes it seem like this whole thing, like I mentioned, in the video jail calls, right? There's all these different layers, and it's really clear at the moment, the Laddergate moment, where Cindy says something, and then George's face is priceless, and it's like he's seen a ghost. And you've got like this idea that if whatever happened to Caylee, let's see, George knows, like, right? And I really believe he does, and maybe there was something at the pool. And I think what I mentioned before was like, I'm in my mind, I'm wondering if Caylee thinks that there was an accident at the pool and George was there, or maybe she doesn't know for sure, but maybe he drowned her, like, right? Like, how would she know? And then Cindy sees the ladder up and the gate open and comments on it. And George's face is almost like, does she know? Like, did she figure this out? Right. But you've got Cindy who potentially could be thinking this is my speculation as to what we've seen just from their demeanor and the complicated nature of everything. But that Cindy, if she sees the ladder and the gate, and she, to her knowledge, is the last person to have gone swimming with Caylee the night before, right? Because we heard about that. That she potentially is the one that left the gate and the ladder because she doesn't really remember. And she kind of vacillated on that when she was questioned about it in the trial. She's like, I think I did, but I don't really know. I don't really know what that type of thing, right? So in other words, she could potentially be thinking, well, what if like it's my fault, right? Maybe there was an accident, but it was my fault because I left the gate and the ladder. So then she would have every reason to also throw Caylee under the bus, right? Not that parents should be doing this, but to save herself, thinking maybe she has some involvement unwittingly. And then you have George, right? And then Caylee clearly knows something happened, but, isn't, as I pointed out before, it's clear to me that she is so sure that when they find Caylee's body, she will be they'll drop all the charges because any evidence they will find will not point to her, but point to someone else. And the irony there is that because of the, how long the body was out there, like the only evidence they were able to get was that duct tape, right? Which it's George's duct tape. So if anything, the only evidence that they were able to get from the crime scene should have connected it to George, but instead they connect it to Caylee, even though she wasn't using the duct tape and George was using the duct tape to put up the flyers and stuff. So, but you can imagine if you're truly innocent, you would expect, well, as soon as they find the body, any evidence they have is going to show that I didn't do it, right? Because there's no way. And little would she have known that in this situation, all they had was that stupid duct tape, and that the detectives, again, this is why I'm putting this together, because we're going to see just how much did they ignore. We're going to compare it. We're going to compare the two lists. The evidence that makes Caylee in detectives' eyes look like the culprit, and the evidence that makes George look like the culprit, but that they ignored. So, but anyway, back to this whole thing. So it's like George isn't participating and helping, and he's saying, and he's blaming Cindy. Now, who knows if that's even true or not? Is he throwing Cindy under the bus, or did she actually say she didn't want him to participate because maybe she's worried that there will be evidence uncovered that could point to her implication? It's just very convoluted and messy. But this is why, like I said, there's like all these different layers of who knows what and who thinks somebody else did something. And but the key takeaway is that if you're these parents and you're not good parents, you have every incentive to try to throw Casey under the bus, which is exactly what they did from the first second. So, okay, so now I have to try to get this on the list here. So let me pull up George. Okay, wait, actually, I need to know when the date was that they talked to him. September 5th. Okay. On September 5th, Detective Melich speaks with Richard Grund, Jesse's father. Richard tells him, so it says on the second Sunday that the family held a vigil. I don't know when they held the vigil. So Richard tells him that, I'll just say, soon after Caylee's vigil, we'll just do it that way. He called George and said, why aren't you doing what ex cops do? To which George responded, and I'll okay, and George, I'll do it. George said he wasn't doing what you think I should be doing because my wife doesn't want me to. Let me put this quote here so this makes more sense. Said he, put it here. Okay. George said he wasn't doing what you think I should be doing because my wife doesn't want me to. All right. This is also interesting. So Richard says, Cindy rules the household, not George, and whatever Cindy wants, Cindy gets. And also, I could lose both my girls on this one. That's what Cindy said. So there is some damning evidence against Cindy. We'll see what else comes out. I may end up having to make a third Word document with the evidence against Cindy. We'll just see. And then Richard also said the story about Zenaida had not changed since early 2006. Let me highlight that. Because again, this supports 2006, 2 years before Caylee went missing. There's been tons of people that heard about Zanny the nanny and thought and it didn't change. It didn't change. This is so different from what you get with, again, like I compared, I think it was on part 2, that like if you were to compare this to say Murdoch, right? The lies that Casey was telling were not for any purpose, and they weren't related to any of the alleged crimes even. They were way before that, and there was for no actual reason. Versus, you have like Alex Murdoch, where it's like people are like, well, you can't convict someone for being a liar. I agree. But the point of the lies was because the lies were to cover up his crimes, right? Whether it was the money or the murders. So very, very different. So this again here, the story about Zenaida had not changed since early 2006. So this is why it's wild that people just have gone all out against with this whole notion about Casey making up Zanny. It's like, I think there are people, well, they just don't have, clearly, people that are saying that seem to still believe that Casey made Zanny up on the fly when her daughter went missing. And of course, they are incorrect, just completely wrong about that. All right. So this is still Richard Grund. Okay, so Jesse decides to give up his only day off from Progressive. He's watching her on Mondays. And then it got to the point where somebody else in my family is watching her 2 days a week. So they're talking about other people watching Caylee. So now Caylee's at our house 3 days out of the week during work. I think Casey's there at night and on the weekends. So this is when, of course, Casey and Jesse are still together. And this, of course, would also be why it made sense that maybe Jesse was the dad, right? But apparently he wasn't. I don't have a problem with that because Caylee's a wonderful little girl, but I work out of my house and it was a severe disruption to me. So I began to press Caylee about, he means Casey, again, getting the names confused. Have you found anybody yet? And that's when she finally said she found someone. And I told you on the phone, it was really odd. Rather than just saying, yeah, I got that worked out. She said, yeah, I found this lady, Zenaida Gonzalez, and she watches my friend Jeffrey Hopkins' son, Zachary. There's Zachary. And Zachary and Caylee play together, and then they love to be together. So that'll work out great. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a whole lot more information than I really needed. Yeah, I agree. But again, this is all consistent, though, which is wild. And part of that, I think, remember, we have seen it already in this trial that you've got Cindy and Lee confirming these things. Like, in other words, it's almost like they go out of their way to help create a false reality for her. So with that context, this kind of makes sense, right? Because there's this false reality going on. So, and by this point, I picked up that Casey likes to tell stories. So we started to pick up that she had a little problem with exaggeration. And this is the other thing that struck me is the whole story that Cindy and Casey are best friends. I can tell you and will testify. Now, he's not been called to testify yet, and I don't know if he will, but he says he will testify to the fact that Casey sat at our table over those months when Jesse wasn't there to talk to me repeatedly and said, well, I don't want to turn out like my mother. I don't want to be around my mother. I want out of that house. So there was an episode a while back where I guess it's related to Cindy being on the stand, where there's a really funny part and there's like, they're doing housekeeping outside the presence of the jury. And Mr. George is trying to get some sort of testimony in. Maybe it's from this statement. And it's something along these lines, because what's really funny is when he's asked directly by Judge Belvin, like, so what is your point? What are you trying to show here with motive? And, then he Judge Belvin point blank says, like, with that logic, wouldn't she have just killed like the whole family, like killed the parents? And he laughs, and then he's like, yeah, that's not coming in, because it was so irrational and illogical that, like, from what Mr. George was suggesting, I think it had to do with potentially thinking that Casey was planning on trying to kill them to have the house or something like that. And it was just like so crazy. So, and I'm wondering again, if this is where they got that idea from, the state. Want to add it to the list of their many different potential motives that they think. I wish I could remember exactly what that exchange was. Maybe what I'll do on the next live stream, I'll find that clip and we can watch it, so that, because this is really relevant to this. So I'll try to remember to do that for the next live stream. But this could be considered, again, from the state's view, damning against Casey, although it makes no sense. But because of that, I'm going to highlight it blue. So this sounds like 2006. So he doesn't really give a time frame. Oh, look at this. She hated her father for the whole gambling thing. And she even tried to get Jesse to move into a house before they got married. That's how bad she wanted out. But the reason that didn't happen is because I told Jesse, if you do that, I won't perform the ceremony. If you want me to perform your ceremony, so they were planning on getting married. You can't live together beforehand. Otherwise, she would have hooked him into doing that. So she wanted out of that house badly. She didn't like her mother. Didn't like her father. I don't blame her at all, actually. Now, that may have changed in 2 years, but that was pretty adamant then. So my take on George that night was he must have told his wife that I was coming over, and she put the kibosh on it, or something frightened him, because we went in a 7-hour period of time of going, I want to talk to you. I got stuff I want to tell you, to avoiding me. Okay, I don't understand what this means. Hold on. So my take on George that night What night? What night? He doesn't specify what night. He must have told his wife that I was coming over, and she put. Is he referencing? Wow, this is really complicated. Is he referencing the night that he calls him? Like, hold on. This phone call? Is this what he's referencing? This phone call? And then the thing about his wife, that must be what he's referencing. Wow, but that's okay. My take on George that night, I'm assuming he means the night that he called George or whatever. He must have told his wife that I was coming over, and she put the kibosh on it, or something frightened him, because we went in a 7-hour, he's saying here, I think it's during a 7-hour time period, we went from going, I want to talk to you, to I got stuff, sorry, a 7-hour time period of going, I want to talk to you, I got stuff I want to tell you, to avoiding me. And again, that's why it seems like he's attributing that to Cindy. I can't say for sure that's the same conversation though. I'm just going to highlight this in the dark orange color, or the dark yellow color, because this seems important, but I don't think we have enough context, and we might get more context later for what this is referencing. It sounds like this is a specific night, and he remembers this. Richard also confronted Cindy about having said how special Casey was. In fact, she had repaid Jesse $250 with a bad check. According to Richard, her reply was, well, she only did it once. This family, man. It's like, that's like, so Cindy, it's like, here she is like, yeah, no, it's fine. But then it's like vacillating between like throwing Casey under the bus and like letting her, saying like, oh, like let her get away with whatever. I think it's probably, she just chooses it based on what suits her, I would imagine. By her, I mean Cindy. So let me add this to Casey's thing. So okay, so Richard Grund tells Detective Melich that Casey didn't like her mom or her dad. That she didn't want to turn out like her mother, and that she wanted out of that house. Okay, Richard also said he'd spoken with Leonard Padilla often since this case began, and he was told by Leonard that they, meaning the Anthony family, was actively trying to frame their son. Leonard Padilla. What? I have no idea. Let me see if I can. Leonard, that name has come up before, but I have no idea what. I don't remember. This is wild. What is going on? Oh, he's a bounty hunter? That's just another one of those weird things. Add it to the list of like the other weird things that we never get more information about, at least yet, such as like the thing about the gunpoint. There were some other things. There's just a lot of weird things. So this is a weird one. Let me highlight this purple for Cindy. And then this is just bizarre. So bizarre. What the heck? So that's referring to, there's a separate transcript for this conversation, and of course not. So it's not saying refer to page 10 of this report. It's refer to page 10 of the transcript. So we don't have the transcript, so we don't have the context, unfortunately. Richard says Jesse told him of an incident between Casey and Cindy that happened shortly before Caylee went missing. This was told to Jesse by Lee. Oh, well, boy, that surely holds a lot of weight, doesn't it? Oh boy. Now, I don't know yet. I'm gonna have to read this and then decide if this is supposed to be damning towards Casey or if this is damning towards Cindy. But what I do know is we can do green for Lee here. There's so much hearsay. It's insane. So let's see what this says. So Jesse, okay. Jesse, dude, okay. Let's figure out this hearsay. So there's apparently an alleged incident between Cindy and Casey. It looks like somebody, one of the two, must have told Lee. Lee tells Jesse, Jesse tells Richard, and now Richard is telling the detectives. So here, this is misleading because here, this is J. Wait, J.A. Who's J.A.? Who's J.A.? I don't remember those initials before. Let's just see. Because they always put them J.A. I don't remember any J.A. It's not Jesse because Jesse is Jesse Grund. Oh, I didn't get this part here. So, I don't know. We don't know who Jay is. So, did you ever hear of that? Any problems between Casey or Cindy the day before she turned up missing? This sounds like it's probably one of the detectives. Oh, John Allen. It's John Allen. That's who it is. Okay, that's who it is. This is Detective John Allen. Okay, so he's asking the questions. Oops, and then the RG. That's Richard Grund's reply. So Richard says the only thing I heard of was from Jesse from Lee. And he says, and he's like, I don't want all that triple, quadruple hearsay. Richard says, and at that point, we don't know if he was telling us the truth. He who? Hold on. The only thing I heard of was from Jesse from Lee. And at that point, we don't know if he was telling us the truth. That must be Lee, right? What did Lee, and then inaudible, what did Lee tell Jesse? What Lee told Jesse? Yeah, this sounds like he doesn't find this very credible. I don't blame him. Like, again, the whole family, right? But Lee, okay, what Lee had told Jesse was that the fight the night before had escalated to the point that Cindy had wrapped her hands around Casey's throat and was trying to strangle her. Fuck. All right. This is going to be purple. Interesting. This makes Cindy, this is damning against Cindy. This might be the turntable for me where now I'm like, or I'm going to have to pull up another document for damning evidence against Cindy. This is crazy. And I agree. It's not credible coming from Lee, but this is interesting. Wow. Wow. What's really funny is that, look at this. Look at this shit. So initially, right, he's like, oh, I'm all for it. Give me the hearsay. Give me the hearsay. What did he say? And then once he says what the thing is, John Allen was probably hoping it was going to be something damning against Casey, like Casey, her mom or whatever, right? And then when he hears that, oh, it escalated to the point that Cindy wrapped her hands around Casey's throat and was trying to strangle her. Now he's like, John Allen is like, okay, Lee told this to Jesse, which sounds to me like he's like, this isn't that credible, right? But of course he thought it was credible before he heard what it was. That's what this sounds like to me. Jesse, right. Cherry picking. On September 5th, I learned that George Anthony had purchased a Taurus 38 revolver. Oh, are we going to get into when he tried to, or almost committed suicide? The firearm was ordered, blah, blah, blah. The weapon was held for safekeeping. So because she was out on bail and they weren't, he couldn't have a weapon there as part of the agreement. On September 8th, Tony Lazarro came to the office at my request to add some more information. Our interview was recorded without his knowledge. During Anthony's polygraph, he had made some comments to the polygrapher that was not previously mentioned to us. He also came to clarify and add to the timeline he had done with Corporal Edwards. One of the comments was that he had told Casey at the time that he wanted to have boys when he was to have children. He said this because he had two younger sisters and knew what was involved in raising girls. I don't know why that's relevant. Anthony added some detail about the day he picked up Casey from the Amscot on June 27th. While waiting for the light at Goldenrod and Colonial Drive to change so he could make a U-turn, he saw Casey standing outside her car in the Amscott parking lot. He said he called her on the phone and teased her about running out of gas. Once he pulled into the parking lot, she walked to his car with her bags. He asked if there was anything he needed to look at, and she said not to bother. Her father was going. This is exactly what he testified to. Her father was going to take care of it. In the garbage bag found in the trunk of Casey's abandoned car was a receipt. Yeah, they really love this Fusion Ultra Lounge receipt. I don't know why that matters. We know she was there. It doesn't fucking matter. Recognize several are right. Okay, so this is, he couldn't explain why the garbage bag would be in the trunk of her car, especially since at the time the car was abandoned, she claimed she was en route. Right, so it just shows that the trash bag came from Tony Lazzaro's house, but I mean, we already knew that. Oh boy, Anthony added some details about the day he and Casey went to the Hope Spring address to get gas cans. This was the first time Casey had called him about running out of gas somewhere near the residence on Hope Spring Drive. This happened on June 23rd. He recalls she called him in the afternoon hours and told him she ran out of gas. She told him to drive as if he were going to her house, which he did, and found her walking south on Chickasaw Trail. Anthony said they went to the house on Hope Spring Drive. The shed was, the gasoline was locked, so he used a tire iron to pry the lock open. That's consistent with the testimony. He believes this was not wrong since she lived there and she needed the gas cans to get her car started. Yeah, I would agree, right? It's like her house. They returned to the car where she insisted on putting the gas in the car. Well, yeah, duh. What else would you do? All he did was hand the gas cans to her. At no time did he notice any strange smell coming from the vehicle. And this was on June 23rd. So that's really, that is exculpatory evidence in a way, right? If you're trying to believe anything that the state thinks, because of the fact that this is after Caylee went missing, but there was no smell from the car. But that's all consistent with his testimony. We questioned Anthony about Casey's alleged drug use. Here we go with the drug use. He indicated that she smoked cannabis sometimes with him, but denied knowing about, yeah. So I don't even, whatever. When specifically asked about Xanax, he said that although his roommate Cameron had been known to use it, he knows nothing of Casey using any. Again, this is exculpatory evidence that, anyway. I don't have a color for things being good for Casey. I'll just highlight this in yellow. Okay. On September 9th, Jesse Grund met with Detective Edwards, FBI agent Nick Savage, and Detective Yuri. Jesse gave us another statement, adding more information. The interview was recorded in his presence with his knowledge. Jesse told us of a conversation he had with Lee Anthony. And this was after his second interview on July 31st. So I guess he's saying that conversation happened between the most recent interview. Lee confided in Jesse that the reason he believed Casey left with Caylee was due to a fight between Casey and her mother. Well, that's consistent with the other story about the strangling, right? The potential strangling. So let's see what he says. Would you please just explain that incident for me and how you learned of it? It says, Lee, shortly after my second interview with Orange County, confided to me that the reason he thought Cindy confided in him, I think he means Casey, and the reason he thought she felt that Casey ran off was there was a big fight between the two of them, and the fight concerned Casey not being home a lot and not bringing Caylee by. Like mad that they're not seeing Caylee enough, sounds like. Got into a very heated argument, which turned physical, and there it is, Cindy started choking Casey. So this is the conversation. The way this is organized, I guess it's chronological, but so it doesn't really make full sense because we heard about this from the dad who heard about it from Jesse, and now we're hearing about the initial time Jesse heard about it. So it's like confusing. But in other words, this is the conversation that was referenced by the dad. So again, this is damning towards Cindy. So what he's saying is that Cindy confided in Lee, apparently, and then Lee's telling this to Jesse, that Cindy thought Casey ran off because they had a big fight. And apparently Cindy must have told Lee that this happened, that she started choking Casey. Incredible. Was there anyone in the house when this else in the house when this happened? Good question. He didn't really expand upon that. As far as I understand from what he told me, it was just Cindy and Casey. Fuck. Jesse went on to mention that Casey and her mother had a strained relationship. Well, sounds like it. I mean, her mom's a piece of work. Absolutely not. I mean, she'd been recently in a very much kind of hatred state for her mother. She'd never mentioned anything in regards to being choked by her mom. And then EE is Eric Corporal Edwards here. You said something in there about being something being spiteful towards mom. This whole thing, maybe he's being spiteful. See, again, this is like trying to dig up information that could make it seem like maybe she killed her daughter to put revenge on her mom, which is insane, right? It's insane. But they're grasping at straws clearly here. Again, with one of their many different theories for motive. Sad. And then he says, what's that about? And then Jesse says, well, I believe she has always been kind of had a love-hate relationship with Cindy. Not uncommon between mothers and daughters. I mean, and if you ask my dad and anybody else when we were together, we were engaged, she didn't want to be anything like her mom. That's what we heard from the dad. She wanted to get out of the house as soon as possible. Yep. And then she suddenly wanted to be just like her mom. And then she goes back to hating her mom again. Boy, that's not hard to understand given the toxicity of this entire family, right? And just so many different issues. And then she loves her mom and her mom's going to give her the house and everything great. And then she hates her mom again. What's funny about this part of giving her the house, because that never made any sense. But then you had that comment from Cindy to her mom about how she said, sell the house and get an apartment. Were they talking about striking a deal where Casey gives her custody of Caylee and then in return, they give her the house? I mean, this is all very weird. We just don't have, like, what? Oh my God, this just gets worse. And then she hates her mom again. I believe it goes all the way back to when Caylee was born. When Caylee was born, Casey wasn't the first one to get to hold Caylee. It was Cindy. And Casey's even voiced to me in the past that Cindy has actually called herself mommy to Caylee in front of Casey before. Oh boy. I believe it. I believe it because Cindy is vengeful and that makes sense. Wow. The house thing is just interesting. I'm going to highlight it in that color here. And then this is insane. This is insane. And what I will say is these statements, though, are all with these different witnesses talking about their relationship. They're all consistent with each other, which is interesting. Jesse also mentioned that in September of 2005, Casey, so this is before Caylee was born. Casey had told him she didn't feel comfortable around, I think, right? No. Yes. Fuck. I think it was before Caylee was born. Casey allegedly told him that before this day, Lee had tried to have sex with her. So, breaking news here, because so far we had only heard about this as that Casey had told Tony Lazarro. She told somebody else about this. Wow. So there's a second person saying this. Jesse didn't ask her to elaborate, but from the context of the conversation, he believed that Casey meant Lee had tried to pressure Casey into having sexual intercourse with her. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I showed Jesse a text conversation between Special Agent AG4 and Casey O'Marie. This conversation was found in the unallocated clusters of Casey Anthony's computer. I don't think this comes in at trial, but if it does, it'll be on the next episode when they do all the computer stuff. Jesse said, because I don't remember anything about a special agent. That's crazy. Jesse said that he was Special Agent AG4. Okay, that's his username or whatever. Jesse did not remember the specific conversation, nor the reference to Xanax, but he admitted that it appeared to be a conversation they had. So he's like, I don't remember this conversation, but those are our usernames. Take that to what you will. So let's see what this says. So I can hit up my friend Annie for some Xanax. So maybe she's going to get Xanax for him. I don't know. We'd be a good time. And then he says, yeah, that's an understatement. Then again, we never need medication to be a good time. How's the fam? Alive and well. Oh, wow. And then Jesse says all three words. I I hadn't heard you talk except in my dreams for months. So after that, I called my mom and we talked and she said, I should see you. Wow. And then Casey says, odd that we've been in the same place as far as dreams and such goes. So this is like long, it sounds like after their breakup and now they're like missing each other type of thing. Interesting. Okay. Jesse believes it took place somewhere around 2007. He says he'd never known Casey take any illegal or non-prescribed drugs, nothing besides birth control pills. And again, this is all this is they're asking everybody about her taking drugs because you know what they want? They really want supporting evidence that she was also taking drugs, which is so terrifying and horrifying that they're asking. Because so far, the only thing that points to the drugs is from one witness, and it was very iffy. It was, where is it? Right, from this childhood friend, Ryan. He's the one that expresses, he's the only one so far to say anything about it. Now, when pressed by detectives, right, you have to remember, he says anything, and these are very wishy-washy, but he's the only one that references that maybe Caylee or Casey didn't want to be a mom because things she couldn't do, right? There's that. And then also the thing about the drugs, but he does say it's odd. So here, a week and a half before Caylee went missing, Ryan had an odd conversation with Casey and tells Detective Melich like she would get into drugs. And the thing that is annoying to me is that it's not specified and Detective Melich does not ask him, according to the report, what was odd about it? Why did you find it odd? And I'm wondering if the answer would have been because she didn't do drugs and that's why he didn't ask, right? But nonetheless, this is the only person who said anything about her doing drugs. Everybody else has flat out said, no, she didn't. But they really, and again, they keep asking people, I think, hoping they're going to get a different answer. Disgusting. So we'll put this in this color here. Again, I almost need to have another color for things that are exculpatory for her. Not that she's being charged with anything related to drugs, but because the state is grasping at straws to charge her with murder, this, I guess, could count as exculpatory, even though it's not related. When asked, Jesse told us of an incident that occurred on Sunday, November 18th, in which Casey appeared to be having seizures. So we've heard about this a little bit, but not much. He says Casey got very drunk. We both passed out on the sofa. She was kind of draped across the floor, picked up her legs, blah, blah. It looked like she was staring straight, and I said her name a couple times, and she started foaming at the mouth and shaking uncontrollably. From my experience, it looked like a grand mal seizure to me. Interesting that he knows what that is. So I moved a table out of the way, turned her on her side. Her lips turned slightly blue. Wow. She continued seizing for probably about, 6 to 8 seconds. When she got done, she let out the sigh. Her eyes popped back open again, then closed, and she was non-responsible. I guess he means non-responsive. Jesse says he never found out what caused this episode, but this was the first and last time he'd ever seen Casey do this. So the only time. Jesse was asked if this could have been an overdose. Oh, they were amazing that they asked this. They really want him to say she was using drugs after he's said it now on more than once. He's said she didn't do drugs, and they keep asking. Incredible. He said he wasn't sure, stating he'd never seen anyone overdose before. Now they're conveniently leaving out the fact that he's already said she didn't use drugs. But anyway, according to what he said below, Jesse also said that he heard Casey and possibly Cindy were going to try to blame him for Caylee's disappearance. He heard it from who? So Corporal Edwards, did you want to discuss what she'd been told by the source? Someone anonymous? Someone told you that there was maybe some posturing towards blaming, putting some blame on you. Can you tell us about that, please? He said, I was told by an individual. Oh, this is the bounty hunter dude, Leonard Padilla. This is wild. What a freaking mess. Who was working with the Anthony family, that he got to sit on a couple of attorney meetings, and Casey was telling her attorneys, and Cindy was backing her. I can tell you this is factually not true, and here's why. Cindy was never present for any of the meetings with her attorney. This is impossible. Because according to this, what he's being told, and now he's being told by this Leonard Padilla dude. Now remember, we saw earlier that apparently Leonard Padilla was also alleging that, so maybe when he said framing his son, he meant Richard's son. Okay. So Leonard seems to really want the Jesse, Grund, and Jesse's dad to think that they were trying to frame him. But what he's saying is impossible because Cindy was never present for any meetings with the attorney. There's no way. I mean, we know that for a fact. So this is impossible. That Cindy was backing her with her attorney. No, wasn't. That I planted evidence in the car, that I had access to the car because I had keys, and that I was framing her because of my. So what's important to note is that this is only coming from this Leonard Padilla dude. We never, I mean, okay. I don't know. It's interesting, right? Because when you think about the notoriety of this case and then the media attention, you could see how somebody like this Leonard Padilla bounty hunter dude maybe was trying to involve himself more and, make more of a story and, piggyback, get some sort of, what people do. So your understanding from this person is that the family's posturing towards, they know that this child is deceased, but they're posturing towards a defense. Correct. Yes, sir. As if the whole family has that mindset. Now, again, I think part of that could be true. Not what Leonard Padilla said, but just the sense that they're all because again, there's all the weird subterfuge and like it's all evident in those video calls, man. I'm telling you, like, especially when that pool or Laddergate moment is huge. That's when it really becomes clear that, and again, like I said, I think it just could even be because Cindy's like, well, is it my fault because I died because I left the gate open and the ladder up? Anyway, but it would appear like they're all working together simply because the parents are all working to throw her under the bus, right? Since Cynthia had made claims that Jesse had been on their home computer the day Casey was arrested, I asked him about that, and he confirmed he did not use that he did use their home computer, but only to look up his personal cell phone information. He also believes he may have accessed his MySpace and Facebook accounts, but he wasn't sure. I'm going to highlight this because this might come up in the next episode when we get to all the computer stuff. This will be great because as we go through the rest of the testimony in the trial, we can pull this back up and refer to it because there's going to be stuff in here that will be important for sure. There already is. On September 11th, we received a phone call from a Rosie Franco. I have no idea who that is, regarding a conversation she had with a waitress about this case. I spoke with Rosie on the phone. Oh, this is when they went and ate that restaurant. I mean, nothing comes of this, but whatever. She claims that Heidi told her that Mallory Parker, girlfriend to Lee Anthony, and at the time employee of the restaurant, right? That Mallory's sure that Casey killed the girl. Now, what's interesting is when Mallory testified, she gave that exact opposite impression. In fact, she literally said on the stand that she didn't think Casey could ever hurt her. Rosie was with her boyfriend, David Portnoy, that night. According to Heidi, Mallory told her she believed Caylee was alive, and even if she were not, she would be found. She claims that she never told Rosie what Rosie claimed about. I mean, this is so much hearsay, but also I don't think it's very relevant. There's all these other witnesses that were so irrelevant. Nathan was, again, he had nothing to say, nothing to add, except for Casey was a good mom. Casey never mistreated Caylee, shit like that. Right. Casey staying there with Tony. He didn't really have that much to add. I'm not worried about this too much with him. Again, they really want this to be true. They really want her to be a drug addict and a drunk, right? I questioned Nathan as to whether or not Casey used drugs. Nathan admits that she smoked weed on several occasions and she drank, but he knows nothing of her use. And again, this sounds like normal, regular for most people type of thing. He said she wouldn't get drunk at the apartment, but she did get drunk every time they went to Fusion. Now, other witnesses that went to Fusion have said otherwise, but whatever. There was actually, I think, one or two that said she always went home early and drank light. Anyway. Where do y'all think she was going when she left in the mornings? To either go work or go see her child. Here's the bit about her working at Universal. We already know all this. So this was, the minimal contributions. I mean, that's being really generous, actually. I wouldn't say there were any contributions, but in terms of the testimony that came out at trial from this witness. Not his fault, but, state's fault. her running out of gas. Nathan remembers Anthony mentioning to him that Casey had alleged her father, George, had abused her in the past. And we've heard about this. I'll just highlight this in the yellow because, again, it's just more confirmation about that, but not anything new. And Nathan was there when Cindy came to the apartment that fateful night. So we know all of this. When she was like, come on, Casey, sorry. Oh, this is interesting. Huh. Casey stormed out in front of her mother outside. Her mother looks at Tony and I and says, I hope you guys are rich because she's going to take you for everything you have. What type of comment is that for some? I mean, dude. She didn't take anything from the apartment. Had a long conversation with Lee. He's like, she lies. We're telling him. Oh, he's like just talking shit about Casey, it sounds like. Lee is. The girl doesn't, her brother says the girl doesn't have a high school diploma, you know? Wow. He said, I don't know if she has a job at this point. I do know that she's put my mother into debt. There was some talks about Lee possibly buying a house for his mother because the debt, none of this makes any fucking sense. That Casey, again, but we've heard other things that sounds like maybe Cindy was working out a deal. This is all very weird about the house thing. Oh my God. So then Sergeant Allen and Detective Yuri Melich meet with Jean County. This person's not testified. I don't know if they will. A neighbor of the Anthonys. Oh boy. Jean had information about two very loud arguments he heard between Casey and her mother in May or June. Both arguments took place on the weekend. He remembers because of the work he was doing outside in his yard, according to Jean. Oh boy. All right. Okay, this is what I heard. The first time I was outside washing the car, Casey came out of the house screaming at her mother and calling her names. What kind of names? He said, I heard F you and just shut up, Mom. I don't want to hear it anymore. And that was about it. She went for a jog. And then the time after that, or I think no, before that, I was outside mowing the grass and I just finished the grass and she came out screaming some stuff at her mom. And I really didn't know what she was screaming, but some stuff and her mom got in the car and drove away. So on both instances, Cindy never raised her voice at her, never really put her whole head down and not said anything. You know, Casey just acted like a spoiled brat, basically. I don't know how to categorize this. I think this is just, whatever, fighting. I mean, he didn't see Casey getting strangled. So I guess you could call this exculpatory for Cindy in a sense. He's not sure of the dates. He thinks roughly one of them could have been, July 15th. Well, that was the day that all the shit went down. So that makes sense. That was when Cindy picked her up from Tony's. Yeah, that whole thing. And we know Cindy was really, really mad and agitated when she came to Tony's apartment. Look at this. So Cindy, they're fishing for these answers that they like, but most of the time they're not getting them. Or they're arguing, and so then leading here, John Allen says, so Cindy was being calm, and then he's like, exactly. So he agrees. Although literally, this so far is the only witness who has ever said anything about Cindy being calm in an altercation. Remember, even when they went to go pick up the car at the wrecker place, all the testimony was Cindy was the one who was like, he said, Simon Birch said his employees were afraid for their safety because of Cindy, not George, because of Cindy. And then even from Lee and from literally everybody, Cindy seems to have a bad temper. So this is an anomaly to hear this, that someone says Cindy was being calm. Anyway. According to Jean, Caylee was not present during the arguments. Okay, and then he speaks to Cameron. That was another one of those witnesses that was like, what? Why are we bothering to call this witness? Not the witness's fault, but just, again, Look at this. They're still trying to get into the drug stuff. That's why I wonder if that's why they interviewed and tried to get into it with all these different college kids, because they're thinking one of them maybe could have been dealing drugs to her, and their answers are not what they're looking for. In short, I wanted to clarify Cameron's drug use and whether or not he'd ever sold, supplied, or allowed Casey to use any Xanax. Cameron admitted to using Xanax, but he never saw Casey use any, nor supplied her with any. They're really trying. Cameron said all he remembered was Casey smoking pot and drinking beer. On October 6th, I called Jeffrey Hopkins and asked if he would come over. Oh, boy. And this story, we already heard about how they met in middle school, got a mass text. He doesn't have a son named Zachary. Okay, now Melina Calabrese apparently is one of Casey's childhood friends. And again, the two childhood friends that have been referenced in this report are Melina and Ryan. Neither of them have testified. I don't know if they will. Maybe the defense will call them. But now we're going to learn a little bit about what Melina thinks, because here we go. On October 9th, Melina agreed to meet with me and talk about the case. She was identified as a longtime friend of Casey. Our interview was recorded in her presence and with her knowledge. They've been best friends since 7th grade, spent a lot of time together, blah, blah. They went to parties together, and never once in high school did she see Casey drinking alcohol or doing drugs. So is it just me, or how many times have we seen this? I should go through and count it at some point, because how many times have we heard this from people? They never saw her using drugs or only smoking pot here and there, shit like that, right? Is it just me, or is it not insane that there's this whole reputation about her being a party girl, and it's implied that she's like using drugs and like partying, right? Drinking heavily. Literally, they're fishing for that type of testimony to use against her, and they're not getting it. They're getting the opposite. It's like literally people, the general consensus has just taken, like it's literally, everything is the opposite of what reality is. It's bizarre. She first learned about Caylee from seeing the photos of her on MySpace. She initially said Jesse was the dad, then later Casey changed the story, claiming the child's father was Josh, a one-night stand who she met at Universal Studios. So this, I was like, oh, maybe that's actually who the dad is, right? But then Casey later told her Josh shortly died after the birthday. So that would go to that whole thing about the obituary. So now I'm thinking that's not, he's another made-up person. Melina said that the reason for the times they weren't friends was because of Casey's lies. One such lie was when Casey told her that Jesse was the child's father. Okay. Even when Casey knew this was not true. Casey only told Melina the truth after Jesse and she had broken up. Melina said Casey would lie about where she was and what she was doing. There's the bit about the sports authority. Casey later told Melina it was a hectic time for her and she didn't have the time to make it. From June 17th to the day Casey was arrested, Melina communicated with her via MySpace and instant messaging. She never mentioned that anything was wrong. Well, we know. Melina did not know Juliet Lewis, but knew Jeff Hopkins from high school. Shout out to Jeffrey Hopkins. Melina says that after Caylee was born, Casey told her she felt her mother was overbearing. I mean, this is obvious, right? This is the possessiveness. Cindy has major issues. Cindy told Casey she should be spending a lot more time at home with Caylee. And ostensibly that's so Cindy can have more time with Caylee, right? It's not. This is just so bad. It's so dysfunctional and so sad. Over the course of this investigation, so this is it right here. This is, I guess, the culmination, right, of why they think she's guilty. Over the course of this investigation, after speaking to numerous witnesses and friends of Casey, there's no evidence that Casey did anything to look for a missing child. And we know that's true. But this is the crux of it for them. It is unknown how Casey got the names Zenaida, Fernandez, and Gonzalez. None of the witnesses we spoke to ever met or blah, blah, blah. What's so crazy again is like that person actually exists, just like the Jeffrey Hopkins thing. Yeah, I mean, we know they were never able to really find her. Okay, let me add this to Casey's thing. So after speaking with what does he say specifically here? Numerous witnesses. There's no evidence that Casey did anything to look for her daughter. Her missing child. I'll just put it verbatim here. You know, it's just one of those things where it's like lack of evidence is evidence. But there's all these different sayings, and there's some that are contradictory. Let me see if I can find that. Let me see. Right. So there's right. The absence of evidence is not evidence. That's what I was looking for. Right. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The absence of evidence. So if you apply that, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. If you apply that to this case, things like she didn't look for her daughter or she wasn't showing emotions. It's like the things that they're expecting to see. It's like they're thinking that there should be evidence of her doing these different things, like crying more or doing whatever. And she's just not doing those things, right? If you apply this legal principle, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, then that their whole theory, the state's whole theory, just falls flat on its face. One of the many ways it does that. So several items collected from the defense vehicle were submitted to the FBI lab. The evidence indicated that there was a decomp. Right. Well, that's up for interpretation, as we have learned from a lot of the testimony that we heard in the last episode and the episode before. Even the stuff with the hair was a mess, an absolute mess. But look, they just stated as if it's fact. It's so unfortunate. Now, here's a synopsis of these. Now, we've not heard from Dr. Michael Sigmund yet, which is weird because he's referenced a lot. We've not heard from, I don't know if he's just not, I don't know what's going on with that. I would expect that we would hear from him because he was highly involved in the whole thing with the freaking air samples. Oh, here's why. Oh my God, fucking hell. All right, let's just recap. Dr. Voss tried to suggest that there was a decompositional event in the trunk, right? We all heard that. Dr. Sigmund could not conclusively demonstrate that human decomposition was previously present in the trunk of the defendant's car. You know what? I bet the defense is going to call him. That's exculpatory. Just when it's in my mind, I'm like, how can this case get any weaker for the state and more pointing to the factually innocence of the defendant? And just when you think there can't be anything else, there's shit like this, which we haven't learned yet, again, because the state didn't call him. Holy fuck. This deserves a different color entirely because their whole case is fucked. This is disturbing on the highest level possible that they still went forward with any of this. Okay, let's do orange. I don't even have the words for this. I didn't want to highlight that one. Okay, hold on. There we go. That is, speaking of exculpatory evidence, right? Karen Lowe, we heard from her, I think, on the last episode or the one before. They can't exclude people as being a contributor for, I mean, again, as we know, that means literally nothing. It means it could be anybody. And the residue is consistent with chloroform. We heard from Michael Wickerbach again, I think on the last episode. And then Dr. Arpad Voss. Now he concluded that a portion of the total odor signature is consistent with a decompositional event. So that contradicts his mentor and esteemed colleague, who he talked about a lot. Michael Sigmund, Dr. Sigmund came up a lot, and I think it kept getting, I'm trying to remember if it got objected to, but the two of them seem like they're almost two peas in a pod, and they've had different findings here. Interesting, right? Even though they were using all the same lab and all the same shit. How the fuck? Okay. Oh, it says before Dr. Voss's involvement. So Dr. Voss recommended Michael Sigmund. This is it. So he recommended Dr. Sigmund. Dr. Sigmund does the shit, does the same. It looks like the same test, and that makes sense. It's the air samples. Does the same test as Dr. Voss. Concludes that there was could not demonstrate that human decomposition was present. So then what do? They say, well, Dr. Voss, let's have you try it, right? You get a different result. That's what happened with the state. Fuck. So then they're like, hey, Dr. Voss, can you do it? And he does the same fucking tests, same shit, and he comes up with a different conclusion that it is consistent with a decompositional event that could be of human origin. Again, that's still... This is where that whole thing, right? This came up in the episodes we've talked about. Just the whole thing. Is it human or is it not? The great debate, right? And Dr. Voss, just like everybody else, didn't offer up that it was human. He had to be pressed by the state, led by the state, and then he would like concede it. But you can tell that these people who are saying this don't really believe it, but they want to see Casey convicted. And so with enough pressure from the state, trying over and over again, they'll like agree to it, but they won't offer that up. And this is why leading is not allowed in trials, right? But of course, when it comes to defense objections in this trial, everything is always overruled. So, wow, I'm gonna do this just because these go back to back here with this involvement. Okay. Oh, looky there. Now after they get this from Dr. Voss, oh, looky there. The grand jury returns an indictment. I guess technically this should be blue because you know what? So this is, let me do this differently. This is supposed to be damning against Casey, which is, it's sad, right? It's sad. Sorry, wrong color. Because look at how weak it is, right? The first expert already concluded there wasn't any human decomposition. So they get in Dr. Voss, second opinion. And the best he can do is say that the smell, the odor signature is consistent with a decompositional event that could be of human origin. And remember, he was even asked, is there an actual specific signature smell for human decomposition? And he said no. And that was on direct examination. Brilliant. Way to go, Florida. Incredible. So this is the last thing on the list then. So I guess I'll go with the second date. So second report. It makes me want to know what his first report anyway. Let me do this thing again. Okay. In his second report from September 24th, 2008, Dr. Voss concludes that portion. This is so weak. A portion of the total odor. I'm going to try to do this verbatim here and quote it. Concludes, I'll do it like this. Concludes, a portion of, this is so sad, the total odor signature identified. And that makes sense because on cross, they kept asking like he didn't use certain parts in his report or he didn't include them. And it was because he didn't get enough of the shit he was looking for to try to say what it was. So he just used portions. So sad. Signature identified in the Florida. The reason I'm putting this in here is because it looks like this is what they used to get this grand jury indictment. Florida vehicle trunk which is crazy, right? Because this doesn't tie anybody specifically. It doesn't prove that anybody even died there, not even close, but it also doesn't tie anybody anyway to that happening if it did. This is crazy. No wonder they have that saying about a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. Consistent with a decompositional, oh my God, I can't type. Compositional why is it not decomposed? I don't know why it's telling me that's spelled wrong. Yeah, I don't know. Weird. Event that could be of human origin. Wow, great. Good job. Sad, really. And then lastly, on October 14th, oh my God, TH, the grand jury returned with an indictment on Caylee for the above charges. Disposition arrested. There you have it. Signed by Yuri Melich on November 5th, 2018. And that's it. I say that. There's probably going to be more in here that will become relevant, but I think we have a good idea. Now, I still have to consider if I want to go through and make an exculpatory one for Caylee. Meanwhile, I will say there's nothing exculpatory for George, none at all, but there's plenty that's exculpatory for her. And then the other thing I need to consider is if I want to make a inculpatory for Cindy sheet, because there's a lot of damning evidence against her as well. I mean, if you look at the standard being so low in terms of what they think is damning to count enough against Caylee, right? I mean, it's wild. It's like literally anything that they look at with Caylee, it's so minimal, but it's like whatever it is, it's like it's on even par with what they have in terms of potential involvement of Cindy or George or both, right? Like it's not any better of a case. And I think again, that's why they kept looking for the shit like she's a bad mom or like drug use and shit, because they were hoping that they would have a judge let that in and it would make it past a 403 and 404B analysis, and that the jury would just, like the generally bad guy rule, they would apply that to her. And I mean, it worked in the court of public opinion, right? She's still considered to be I just saw this just the other day on something, the most hated woman in America. It's wild. But it's all fake. It's all fabricated. Literally none of that's even true. But they just they stuck with it. Like, this is insane that this went forward. It's insane. I mean, for people that look at like Karen Reed or Richard Allen, and it's like, how the heck did this make it to trial? How can the prosecution, the office, the DA's office, go forward with these charges with the evidence they have? This to me is just as bad, really, just as bad. This is just as bad. And similarly to Karen Reed and Richard Allen as well, there's also other people who looked like they should be strongly considered as suspects, but weren't, just like in the other cases, right? The McAlberts, right? And then you have all the different people in Delphi that, you know, weren't looked into fully and seemed to have just every same opportunity. It's just the same thing here with George and Cindy. And they just, and they testify as witnesses for the prosecution. And the whole time you're watching it, and you're like, why does it feel like they should be on trial? I mean, and I had no knowledge of this coming into it, right? But it was crazy how immediately from the first second that George got on that witness stand, he was the first witness the state called. What a disaster. I was like, oh my God, what? I mean, it was insane. And it got only worse every time he testified. Same with Cindy. I mean, I think Lee did better on the stand than George and Cindy, but he also wasn't on the stand for nearly as long. They kept him on the stand brief both times, or 3 times, or whatever it's been. And actually he'll be testifying again in the next episode, but again, it's brief. So, wow. That's it. So yeah, so what we'll do is at some point we'll do a conclusion thing where we take a look at the evidence against Casey and the evidence against her dad and compare them. And then maybe we'll also have a sheet for Cindy. And then the other thing I mentioned too was to find that clip about the part where Judge Belvin laughs at the state when they're trying to say something and it should have been a family denial, because that's relevant to a lot of that. All these little whiffs here about the house and getting the house, it makes no sense. We got a little more information about it. It still is confusing, but the state believes it means something, and that's where that clip will be relevant. So I'll pull that up as well. But that's it for this one. So yeah, hopefully the color coding is helpful for everybody. And yeah, but appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for being a squirrel, and I will see you guys next time.